It's just 4 days until Americans choose their next president, and women's issues are in the spotlight in the final days of campaigning. It's the first presidential election since the historic Supreme Court ruling that struck down nationwide abortion rights. And Kamala Harris says Donald Trump doesn't respect women. Polls are pointing to an unprecedented gender gap. So how will America's women decide? I'm Phil Gale in Berlin, and this is The Day.
He will ban abortion nationwide. He will restrict access to birth control, put IVF treatments at risk.
No, she lies about everything. IVF, she lies. I feel like I'm the father of IVF.
He simply does not respect the freedom of women.
No, I want to protect the people. I want to protect the women of our country.
This is the same person who said that women should be punished for their choices.
I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
Also on the day, donors have given billions to the Trump and Harris campaigns to win the White House. So do the mega rich have too much influence over American democracy?
We're going to be awarding $1 million every day from now until the election.
Welcome to The Day. We're in the final days and hours of the US presidential campaign. Tens of millions of ballots have already been cast amid record early voting. The polls, though, have not budged, and pundits agree that the race is still too close to call. Kamala Harris hopes to become the first female president, and pollsters say the gender gap in support for the two main parties is more pronounced than in recent election cycles. Women are tending to lean towards the Democratic Party in general, and Kamala Harris in particular. Many analysts believe the way women vote will determine whether Harris or Trump wins the White House. So with both sides depending on a strong turnout, Harris has seized on campaign remarks by Donald Trump that he will protect women. The Vice President has used this as an opportunity to warn her supporters about Mr. Trump's views on women and to remind them that their rights are on the ballot. And the first presidential vote since Trump's Supreme Court picks helped to roll back abortion rights.
Donald Trump's not done. Did everyone hear what he just said yesterday? That he will do what he wants, quote, and here's where I'm going to quote, whether the women like it or not. He does not believe women should have the agency and authority to make decisions about their own bodies. This is the same man who said women should be punished for their choices. He simply does not respect the freedom of women or the intelligence of women to know what's in their own best interest.
She's a low IQ individual. She doesn't even know she's lying. I'm telling you. This is not what you want for your president. That has nothing to do with me. This is not what you want. She's a very low IQ individual. She's dumb as a rock, and you can't have that. You can't have that.
So as we head into the last weekend before Election Day, let's bring in our Washington Bureau Chief, Ines Pohl. Welcome, Ines. So both campaigns trying to fire up their bases and win over undecideds. Is Trump's language about women likely to move the needle?
Well, what is clear, Phil, is here that in these final days, Donald Trump really is focusing on the male vote, where he has significant support among not just white voters, but also Latino and black men. He seems to believe, and his campaign seems to believe, he can sway this crucial demographic by speaking just very disrespectfully about women. We just heard it, how he says he will protect women, and I quote him here, whether they like it or not. And he also made really violent comments about Liz Cheney, calling her a war hawk, and that she should, and I quote that as well, fired upon. It's very uncertain in this tight race whether this approach will gain him male support or further alienate women. But what we can see here, that the rhetoric is getting really more aggressive and violent during these last days.
And so in this first presidential contest since the landmark Roe versus Wade decision was overturned by the Supreme Court with 3 of Donald Trump's handpicked judges, how big a role are abortion rights playing in this cycle?
I mean, Trump's victory in 2016 was partly because of the support from white suburban women, a group he may have lost following this Supreme Court 2020 decision to overturn nationwide reproductive rights protections. You know, he tried to distance himself from this ruling over the last months, but many Americans just know that it resulted from the judges he appointed to the Supreme Court. Phil, during my travels across the country, I really encountered heartbreaking stories from women who are affected by these restrictive laws. This is my latest report. Nancy Davis has 2 daughters, Summer, who is 3, and baby Star, who is just 5 months old. It's a bigger gap between them than she had planned, but a pregnancy between the 2 girls turned into a nightmare. In June 2022, she was at 10 weeks when the fetus she was carrying was diagnosed with acrania, a fatal abnormality.
So I remember vividly sitting in a cold hospital room here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My doctor walked in and he said this is the worst case scenario. They normally die in utero, but if he or she makes it through birth, then he or she would die within minutes. So he recommended an abortion to ultimately protect my health. However, due to Louisiana's restrictive abortion laws, I was denied the care that I desperately needed.
Nancy went public with her situation and got funding with the help of the Bridget Alliance, an organization which offers practical support for people who need an abortion. She traveled 1,400 miles to a clinic in Manhattan, New York, for the procedure.
You know, having to leave your kids, leaving your family behind just to access fundamental health care and going to a foreign place where I don't know anybody, you know, like it was one of the scariest things of my life. And I was emotional the entire time, like on a plane, at the clinic.
She established a foundation in her own name to support others facing similar situations. We leave Louisiana in the deep south and head for Ohio. Here in the Midwest, access to abortion has been sharply limited since the Supreme Court decision, but it's still possible. People like this camp outside this clinic in Dayton, wanting to persuade women to not have abortions.
Right now.
The clinic even has security because of people protesting outside.
So, but as election comes, you'll see more and more people doing that.
Dr. Catherine Romanos has been carrying out abortions here in Ohio since 2013 and now sees many people coming from other states.
I think that's the intention of a lot of these laws, that people will be confused, that people will be scared, and that there will be less abortions. We see patients from Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas, Texas. Crossing state lines to get health care is incredibly stigmatizing. An abortion is a lonely decision as it is. So I think people who might have told a friend or a family member if they were staying at home for their care, maybe are less likely to do so if they're traveling because it feels like they're doing something wrong.
We ask her about the election.
I think it's not good news for anyone with a uterus or anyone who enjoys bodily autonomy if Donald Trump is elected. I think he's been really cagey about his own opinions, but I think the people around him are very clear that they want abortion to be inaccessible.
You're a born swinger.
That potential future worries Nancy Davis.
You're a born swinger. When I think about my children going through the same thing that I did, or like my daughter's going through the same thing that I did, it makes me angry. It makes me scared. of what that looks like, and it's very frustrating. And that's one of the reasons that I advocate very, very hard to prevent my children from going through it, to prevent your kids from going through it, and future generations to come from going through the same thing.
For Nancy's daughters, the choice of what they can do with their bodies may be decided on election day.
Now, Ines, you've been travelling around the country this year, spoken to lots of women. What's your feeling about how women will decide and whether they'll put Kamala Harris over the line to become America's first female president?
Yeah, right. So it will really come down who kind of motivates more people. Will it be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? And my feeling is that many women, but also many men who are supportive of reproductive rights, of kind of women being able to say what's best for them, that they know really what's at stake and that they are really, really eager to go out there and vote. And we saw, for example, in the very important swing state of Georgia, that many people are taking advantage of early voting possibilities, and 60%, 58% of them are women. So that might indicate that women voters, female voters, are a little bit more kind of motivated to go vote. But, you know, as the margins will be so small, it's so impossible really to say what the outcome will be on Tuesday night.
Okay, well, Kamala Harris isn't actually the only woman running for president. A Green Party candidate, Jill Stein's on the ballot in around 40 states. Democrats fear that Ms. Stein could siphon off votes from Harris in must-win states like Michigan, where the race is expected to be close. She's been reaching out to Michigan's larger Arab-American population, which is unhappy with the Biden administration's support of Israel's war in Gaza. Well, now a coalition of European Green parties is calling on Jill Stein to drop out of the presidential race. European Greens have warned that this election is taking place at a watershed moment. They're criticising Donald Trump as anti-democratic and a danger to the planet. They say Stein should endorse a Kamala Harris. So Ines Pohl, Jill Stein's made it clear she will not bow out. How serious are the fears that she could become a spoiler for Kamala Harris?
Yeah, the fears are really big. I mean, as you just mentioned, like in swing states like Michigan, the significant Arab American population will be critical in this election, and many Arab voters are really disappointed with the Biden-Harris Israel policy. But that's not all, Phil. Many Arab Americans are also just very conservative, and they agree on Trump with limiting the abortion access, for example, or also agree on his policy when it comes to LGBTQ rights. So this is really a threat for the Democrats, that Jill Stein might take away these couple of thousands of votes, which will by the end decide who will become the next president of the United States. And that's the reason why the European Greens try to reach out to Jill Stein and convince her that she drops out of the race to not kind of enable Donald Trump to become the next president of the United States.
And briefly, Ines, with the election expected to be so close, how confident are you that it will be peaceful?
Well, that's a big fear that it will not be peaceful. I mean, Donald Trump already kind of is putting out the news, if he's not winning, that the election will be rigged. We are expecting him to announce to be the winner in the middle of the election night, long before we really know who really would have won this campaign. And some of his supporters are just ready to fight, and that's what he's putting out. Remember when he nearly got killed during this assassination attempt, what he did, he jumped up and kind of put his fist in the air saying, fight, fight, fight. And this is kind of what resonates with many of his supporters when they think that the election is stolen again from Donald Trump. So everybody here is prepared for violence. We are prepared. Our colleagues are prepared. The police is prepared. And here in Washington, in the capital of the United States, we already see shops, putting up like wooden stuff in front of the windows, to get ready. So it might be really turning into a really very awful and dangerous time here in the United States after November 5th.
Okay, thanks for that, Ines. DW's Washington Bureau Chief, Ines Pohl, will be talking to you in the days ahead as well. Thank you so much. Well, the presidential candidates have raised more than $1 billion each in this election cycle, with a good deal of it spent in the final days of the campaign. So where did all that money come from and where did it go? And was it worth it?
The sums are staggering. Democrats and Republicans combined spent $500 million on advertising in 2 weeks in October. $81 million raised by Kamala Harris in a single day in July. Daily giveaways of $1 million from Elon Musk paid to people who sign his petition, attracting the attention of the Justice Department. Not to mention the $118 million in counting that Musk has contributed to a Trump-allied group. But this campaign isn't just unprecedented in the huge sums raised and spent. For the Republicans, what used to be kept backstage, a gentleman's agreement that campaign cash would be converted to special favors after the election, is now literally out in front. Elon Musk, Trump's biggest donor, appears at his rallies.
Take over, Elon, just take over.
And Trump says he'll put Musk in charge of cutting federal spending if elected.
Hi, everyone.
Democrat allied groups have their own mega donors too, including Bill Gates, who gave $50 million. Harris often courts Wall Street and Silicon Valley donors. But her promises to backers have remained more traditional, with no explicit favors made public. The Harris campaign also relies on millions of small donors, people who give $200 or less to finance its operations. Running for president has always been shockingly expensive. But campaign budgets have exploded in recent years, from a few $100 million in 1980 to nearly $4 billion in 2020. When the tally for this election comes in, it'll be by far the most expensive in U.S. history. The money flows from individuals and corporations to campaigns and political action committees, or PACs. Individuals can only give a few $1,000s to a candidate's campaign, but can get around this by donating to PACs, which then give the money to campaigns. And corporations can only contribute to PACs. To escape the limits, there's a different category of so-called super PACs that can spend money to influence the election, usually on advertising, but are officially not allowed to coordinate with the candidate's campaign. The huge sums don't always translate into votes, however. Starting about 10 years ago, the Democrats have consistently spent more than Republicans. In 2016, Hillary Clinton outspent Donald Trump by about 2-1, and yet she lost. The biggest spender also lost in 1984, 96, and 2004. This time around, Democrats have outspent Republicans again on advertising for Kamala Harris, while her poll numbers slid slowly down as the weeks went by, ending in a virtual dead heat coming into the election. To get votes, Democrats are also pouring campaign money into old-fashioned organizing efforts. That means trained volunteers, supervised by experienced political workers, knocking on doors, and trying to motivate voters to actually go to the polls for their candidate. Republicans have outsourced most of that work to PACs, including Musk's, a big gamble on inexperienced private groups. Giving money to politicians is always a gamble that they will win. But this time around, the Republicans have tried to frame that gamble as a simple investment.
And pray over him.
Trump has removed the guardrails yet again, telling Elon Musk that his money can guarantee him a job and explicitly promising a range of big businesses that he will help them out in exchange for donations, telling them in clear terms that their money will be well spent.
Professor Rosalyn Cooperman is chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Mary Washington in Virginia. She studies the ways in which fundraising groups support women candidates. Welcome to DW, Professor. We've been hearing
Thanks for having me.
We've been hearing about a record gender gap in this election cycle. How's that playing out in fundraising?
Sure. Well, I think a couple of things are important to recognize when we talk about campaigns and even campaign finance, right? The electoral default here in the United States still remains male, right? So a majority of men are running for elected office, and a majority of men also fund political campaigns. That said, with Kamala Harris running as the Democratic nominee, and certainly Hillary Clinton before her in 2016, we see women as very capable fundraisers, right? We also see, in terms of voting, women are more reliable voters in the United States than men. They turn out at a higher rate to vote than men, and they are, of course, registered at higher rates than men. Now, that doesn't mean that all women are the same in terms of their preferences, but we do know that women are more reliable voters, and that as it relates to political campaigns and funding them, women do participate in raising money. Or rather in contributing money to campaigns.
And most of the focus, certainly internationally, has been on the presidential candidates. But what about other races, such as for Congress? Are donors prioritising getting more women elected, or just defeating incumbents with records they don't like?
Well, I think it depends on the group that you're looking at, right? And so in our political system, we have no shortage of special interest money, groups with very clear preferences, either from a policy perspective and often from a partisan perspective. We do know, and research that I've done takes a look at groups that support women candidates. There are more candidate support groups designed to support Democratic women, as in the party, not just favoring democracy. But if we look at organizations that exist, there are more in the space that exists to support Democratic women candidates compared to the Republican counterparts. They are often arranged around the issue of abortion. And so one of the things that we're seeing in 2024, for example, is all of those factors coming together, right? You have a woman of color at the top of the ticket on the Democratic side. You have several key races in both the House and the Senate featuring women candidates. And then you also have abortion on the ballot as a state matter in 10 states, including several swing states where it's viewed as a toss-up. And so if you pull those ideas together, we see a very important space that women and money can occupy.
And you talked about women being reliable voters. Do candidates need what you might call female-centred policies, or does it always come down to the bread and butter issues, jobs, healthcare, the economy?
Those are women's issues, right? And I think particularly if we're thinking about issues related to healthcare, issues related to the economy, and the like, these are important issues that all voters should be interested in, all citizens should be interested in. And certainly we would expect that women voters would be especially interested in them, right? Everything from wages to cost of living as it relates to health insurance, because in this country, we do not have a nationalized health care or universal health care. The continued access to health insurance to bring down costs, and also, of course, the issue of abortion and the broader idea of reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy.
OK. I was going to ask you about the importance of the so-called women's vote for candidates, but just in the last week, we've listened to various learned people talking about how Latino voters or black male voters and now even Puerto Rican voters might sway such a tight race one way or the other. So is it useful to break down demographic groups in this way? One wonders if it doesn't just lead to people regarding them as monolithic in their thinking.
There's certainly a challenge, right? When we think about groups of voters, we can look at aggregate political behavior. So how is it that voters who have certain characteristics behave as a group? If you take women, again, we've talked about this in the context of women are more reliable voters than men. They turn out at higher rates than men. This is true across age. This is true across party identification. But when we begin to unpack that, so the marital status of women, for example, we know in the 2016 election, for example, when Hillary Clinton ran as the Democratic nominee, another woman at the top of the ticket, white married women, a majority of them voted for Donald Trump. And so when we start thinking about the general behavior of voters, that provides some insight, of course, as to how we can expect them to behave. But it is important to think about other characteristics like their education, their marital status. At least here in the United States, those are two important benchmarks, in addition, of course, to their party affiliation.
A fascinating analysis, and we thank you for it, Professor. A political scientist, Professor Rosalyn Cooperman from the University of Mary Washington. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And that was the day. You can follow the team on social media at DW News. Latest headlines, of course, on dw.com or on the DW app. For now, though, from the entire team on the day, thanks for spending part of your day with us. Have a good day and a great weekend. Bye-bye.